Hey guys, it's Joel, and I'm going to do a really quick video explaining what ETT is, because it's really cool. So, a lot of people may be familiar with EMDR, which uses eye movement to process trauma, or brain spotting, which I've done a lot of videos on, which uses eye position to treat trauma. ETT is a brand new thing, and what it uses to treat trauma is using not eye position or eye movement, but color and light frequencies. Especially light direction and color hue. So the person who started EMDR is Francine Shapiro. The person who started brain spotting is Dr. David Grant. And the person who started ETT is Dr. Stephen Vazquez out of Austin, Texas. So this is not as big of a model. You won't see it anywhere else. And I will admit that before I did it, I was like, this doesn't work. This is crazy and hokey and out there. If I hadn't had brain spotting done to me, I never would have believed that treatment worked. Brain spotting didn't, I was expecting nothing. I was getting trained on the computer like during COVID, and I was like, how would my eye even know that the pointer is getting further back because the screen is the same way? I'm very skeptical, I'm very analytical. And then I dissociated for 20 minutes, and they were able to replicate that effect over and over and over again. I was able to treat a whole lot of trauma that I wasn't even really trying to get at, didn't quite know that certain behavior was a trauma response. And it was incredibly effective. And then I was able to replicate that with patients. So there's more research on something like brain spotting than there's going to be on ETT, just because it's newer and it's smaller. But the way that I find modalities that work, it's like, one, I don't just get the training, I actually go and do them and see if it works for me as a patient. And then two, I see if patients like it and if providers like it. When we opened, there were 3 brain spotting providers in Alabama, and now there's almost 60 just in the zip code. There's like 52 or something. So it's growing a whole lot because people like it, and models that don't work tend not to do that. So I'll admit that this seems hokey, and you're fine to have your doubts about it. So did I. The person who trained me Dr. Stephen Vazquez did half the training. With the other trainer, I was talking to her at lunch, and she said, I would go to these conferences, and this guy would get these people to come up, and he would say, explain how color worked in the brain and all these things, and I was just like, he's completely full of it. Like, there's no way I talked smack about him. Like, I walked out of his things. And she did that for years until one of her best friends got trained in ETT and said, hey, you should really try this. It's really working for me and my patients. And she was like, oh no, that's that crazy thing. And then she tried it, and she went back to Stephen Vazquez and was like, oh my God, I'm so sorry. That's how she came into it. So the theory behind ETT, emotional transformation therapy, is that there are certain ways that our brain responds to color. That basically color is correlated to an emotional reality, and there's certain emotional realities that your brain has learned are kind of icky or bad, or you don't like them and it wants to avoid them. And so because of that, you can use light frequency or to treat different things that come up. And one of the things that's really cool about ETT is that you can detect dissociation amongst patients immediately. It's one of the only models that does that. Other models of psychotherapy, you're kind of noticing when somebody is losing time, maybe you're talking to them or you're seeing something, and that's how you're detecting dissociation. But the dissociation has to be pretty far along. With this, you detect it immediately, and it validates one of the theories that I've had for a long time, which is that we all dissociate a little bit all the time, that it's a pretty normal function of the brain, and that there's spaces that we avoid very unconsciously that interfere with a lot of our life, that some people don't like to feel judgmental or hold authority. Some people don't like to feel mean or violent, and so they almost are enabling sometimes. There's different things that we do. And so one of the models that ETT uses is this spectral chart. And the spectral chart, there are different colors that correspond with different emotions. And again, I hear myself like, this sounds cranky, but I promise when you get in the room, it works. And so what the provider will do is they'll listen to you talk about an emotional issue, and then just kind of make you look at different colors and say, hey, look here. All right, look there. And there's a couple other bits of the technique. Sometimes you close your eyes and you imagine the color and different things. But what happens is that when they get the color right, which they usually do, or Dr. Stephen Vazquez did for me, and then I've been having good luck with my patients, that, okay, this is the kind of thing that the parasympathetic nervous system is doing when they're talking, or the sympathetic nervous system is doing, and so that means that you're going to be looking at a blue-green. At least that's what I see. The patient, when you get that right, they see something totally different. And it's funny because they can see it for a minute, and then it changes. The visual distortion is sometimes that this goes white, sometimes the entire board changes that color, sometimes the color black, like you'll see the whole thing go black, which is what happened for me. And I'm sitting there being like, my eyes know that this is blue, and it looks like a computer screen. It's like flickering black, and then it's going all the way black. And Dr. Vazquez was like, yeah, that's what you're dissociating on this because of your issue and where this thing showed up in your body and when you felt it. And I could see the other colors, and I keep going back. And so in that way, it's kind of brain training. Because what you're doing is you're teaching your brain to be comfortable with that emotion. And boy, like, you feel that emotion when that color's going away. And then as you learn to get better holding it, you start to see the color come back. So when you dissociate it first and the whole thing goes black or the whole thing gets gray stripes, or I've had somebody saw a dot one time, you know, you're like, great, we found it, this is good, you're really dissociating strongly, let's do it. And it's a very encouraging thing. I would say that as far as like a therapy goes, this is in between the clinician-led cognitive aspects of EMDR, which is very strongly clinician-led, and then brain spotting, which is almost entirely patient-led. The patient is just going through a door the clinician opens, the clinician is staying behind them in brain spotting. In EMDR, the clinician is saying, okay, what's the bad belief? We're going to replace that with a good belief. Now think of the good belief, and you're very much trying to have all this conceptualization and information. ETT is somewhere in the middle. Because I'm still making an assumption with knowledge that they have that I don't about, like, okay, let's look at purple here because this is about color. But I'm letting them go and them have the experience. I'm not telling them what to think. I'm just letting things come up. So if you like those aspects of EMDR, the attachment focus, a lot of those things, this might be a good thing to get trained in. As a brain-based medicine provider, I do a whole lot of different kinds of therapy. But if you are looking for somebody who does brain-based medicine and you've heard that this stuff works and cognitive therapy has not really worked for you for trauma, what I would do is look for somebody that's got a lot of these different models. Or if you're a clinician trying to figure out how to round out your portfolio and help the most people, I would get a couple of these models because they fit together. Brain spotting is very similar to ETT. And because brain spotting is very similar to ETT, I can learn from each modality, and my experience as a clinician is like richer for having both, and the EMDR background. In the same way that, like, I don't sit there and say, okay, I'm now switching from IFS into voice dialogue. So let's talk about the inner critic for a minute and put those firefighters away. Okay, now let's get rid of this voice dialogue model that we're doing and go back to Jungian therapy. So what is the archetype? I'm not doing that. There's an understanding with parts-based therapy where these things all fit together, and the more that you see that other people have built these lenses for you to use, the more that very similar ones describing a similar phenomenon and treating trauma the same way, in a somatic way, in an experiential way, in a patient-led way, then the more they fit together and that you have layers to understand a patient's experience. One of the things from the first level 1 training that I like a whole lot are these wands. And so the wands are a way that you can use color with eye movement in the same way that brain spotting works. And you can sometimes combine them together if you feel like the person is having an issue, two separate emotions or two separate physical somatic experiences that are sort of coming together in a way. So the way that ETT uses eye movement, I think, is brilliant because I'd seen this before in the eye, but I'd never really known how to conceptualize it. What Dr. Stephen Vazquez says is that when we go into the subcortical brain and we're having a primarily trauma-informed response because we're feeling emotion really strongly, we basically move like a reptile. If you wore an MRI cap or something, the mid and the prefrontal cortex, the neocortex and the mid-cortex, they're not very active. Those are newer parts of the brain, and one of the things that they have is the ability that mammals have to move slowly. When you're in a trauma brain, your eye moves jerky, like a chicken or a lizard. If you've ever seen a chicken or a lizard, they are missing the part of the brain that lets them move slowly. So a lizard is like, and so you'll notice that when people are, this is what brought me into brain spotting when I was doing EMDR, the eye starts to jerk around. And it has a pattern that it's reliving that comes from a trauma response. So brain spotting is just doing one position at a time or spot. But I'd always kind of notice, hey, the eye, every single time mom comes up, every single time being trapped comes up, every single time this guy's talking about a similar thing, the eye goes ping, 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 or it does the Konami code or whatever. So I'm going to kind of process those brain spots like this. When this one ends, I'm going to go to this next one. If I'm doing, full spectrum, just across the whole thing processing. So I already was kind of seeing that, and it makes a ton of sense that that's the way that he does it. And so the ETT eye movement. It's not like EMDR or brain spotting. What he says is that in order to get that lizard brain to integrate with the prefrontal cortex and the mid-cortex, you got to bring the mid-cortex back online, and you got to involve those mammal parts of cognition in this lizard experience of trauma. And the way that you do that is that you get those colors that are related to the patient, and you force the eye to slow down. And it is wild because that eye does not want to slow down. So like when I've done this with patients and when I felt it done to me, my eye is like wanting to ping, but I have to look at this color, and you're feeling what the color's bringing up. But also it's like this rush of emotion that you used to just feel it in your body, but all of a sudden you're thinking about it because you're turning the rest of the brain on when you say, no, you're not going to go zing zing. We're going to go very slowly. Move slowly. And so that mammal brain is starting to come on to do that process, and it's grabbing a ton of that information. And so this is almost, brain spotting is like throwing somebody in a well. They're slowly getting out of the well. They're overwhelmed by it. When they come out, it's almost like transcendental. Sometimes they lose time. EMDR is very structured. You're telling people. This is kind of in the middle. It's like pulling the thing out of the person. Like you're taking them somewhere and you're letting the process happen. But, you're still saying, okay, I'm going to switch to blue for this reason. I'm going to switch to orange for this reason. I'm going to switch to far red because that's the tone of where we are, and that's what the body is doing now. And so you see the stuff just come out of people, and it is wild. Like when I've done it with patients in here, you see people who are like feeling the experience but can't talk about it, and you start to do that movement, and it's like they're talking and they don't even know they're talking. They're like, and then this happened and that makes sense, and it's in my jaw, and then blah blah blah, and this always happens to me. And it's because you're forcing the intellect to understand this emotional experience, and all of a sudden we have language for it, and it's coming up with words. It's very freeing. I also think that patients like this a lot because you can't, even though it's not as like intense as brain spotting. I mean, brain spotting, you feel like you were shocked with the car battery sometimes, and you're not going to be able to say, well, this doesn't work or this is hokey. You might think that, and then you feel it and you're like, I can't see, like this is real. This is not as dramatic. I think that somebody who's very inclined to write this kind of stuff off, who does not like the woo-woo aspect of therapy at all, I wouldn't start with something like this because I think that they could maybe talk themselves out of it, even if it worked. But the patients who like it, one of the reasons they really like it is they have an immediate visual proof of this emotion, and so they don't feel gaslit anymore. They don't feel like, well, did that really happen? Am I just making this up? Am I not tough enough? It's like, no, your brain cannot handle that. You go here and you see black. Okay, that's real, all right? And they've found that to be incredibly validating, and it's kind of enriched their self-esteem. So if you want more information about the eye movement therapies, I think brain spotting is a great training everyone should get if you're working with trauma at all, or even if you're not. I think ETT is a great training. The Venn diagram between it and brain spotting are so vast that I would just view it as a different phase or natural development of the same kind of exploration into the same type of brain-based medicine. If you want to see the video where I talk about all the different kinds of brain-based medicine, if you don't know the different eye movement therapies, there's a video that compares them. So there you can click the link, and there's one where I talk about EMI, EMDR, brain spotting, and ETT all together. So I hope that's helpful and that this is interesting. I've done the other phases of ETT. I've had them done to me as a patient. I've not been trained in them. The other ones deal with light frequency and then light direction. So you're using that to help unlock an emotional thing. So there's more to ETT than this. But ETT is the science of using color and light and direction and hue and light frequency to unlock something in the brain, just like brain spotting is using eye position. So I hope that's helpful. Check out the website for more resources, www.gettherapybirmingham.com. And if you want to come by and try ETT as a provider to see if it's something you want to get into, let's come play around with the board, see what it's all about, and I'll help you find a training. Thanks. Bye.